Another really helpful thing we can do is look at the math nodes inside of material editors. So again, we're going to make another material here. Come into your content drawer and save where you need to. And I'm just going to happen to save mine in this core nodes folder I created, but we're going to go to materials. I'm going to name this m underscore math nodes 01. And what we're going to look at is a couple different nodes. First of all, we can type in add. We can type in subtract. We can do divide and multiply. And sometimes you type it out a little bit more specific. Okay, there you go. And so with these, we can do quite a bit. And you might be asking me, well, why would I want to use these? And the answer is sometimes we'll have nodes that are specific to, let's say, grayscale or black to white. And it can be really handy to add a color to on top of something or subtract it from it, or to multiply color. So again, let's just make a constant 3 vector and assign it a color. And if I just assign this, let's actually just make it kind of a gray color without any color on top of it. And if you notice, if I take this pin and I left click drag it into multiply, and I drag this out to base color, the very first thing that happens is nothing special happens because we're multiplying this value, this x, y, z. All three of these values get multiplied by 1. So the x value gets multiplied by 1, y, z, etc. Now, let's say that I just wanted to darken this texture. Well, if I multiply by 0.5, what you'll notice is my texture now darkened. And what you might be asking yourself is like, well, what was that actually doing? Well, we're basically halving these values by multiplying by that. And I can put this to 0.25. And the same goes for divide. If I divide by 1 and I plug into base color, we get our base color. But again, if I divide by 2, I get the same thing as if I multiply by 0.5. And you might be saying, well, why is that? And it's because they're reciprocals of each other. But usually, if you have the option of using multiply or divide, the multiply node usually is a little cheaper in terms of the math calculation. So I usually prefer to just use multiplies with fractions or a decimal value. And so this is something we can think about. The other thing we can do is not just multiply it by a single number. We can also come in here and do, I'm going to hold down the 3 key on the keyboard and left click to do the shortcut to create a constant 3 vector. And I'm going to plug this into multiply. And again, we have this to our base color. And you'll notice it's multiplying all these values by 0. So anything by 0 is 0. So it's just black. But if I come in here, and remember our original color is just white, I can actually come in here and make it say red. And what I'm basically doing is tinting my color by multiplying all of its values by this red value. And this allows me a lot of freedom to be able to kind of customize the color of something. So let's say I made a chair or a table. I can just come in and change that color very quickly. And again, the same is true for if we were to add or subtract from each other. So one thing I can do is type in, let's say linear gradient. Yeah, linear gradient. And what this is actually going to do is create a gradient just like you would maybe see in Photoshop. So I can pull this node off to add, and we could start previewing this node. And what you'll notice is that this is a gradient that's going across. Let's actually do the V coordinate. And right now I'm adding 1. So I don't want to do that. Let's just add 0. So this is what that texture looks like, or that UV. And so I get this gradient kind of going like this. And again, if I just add to every value, if this is 0 and it gradients up to 1, if I add 1, we're now actually at this value, now it's 2, and now that original value that was 0 is now 1. And so we can like brighten things up. We can take the ability for us to kind of get rid of like color information. We can also do that in the opposite direction. We can actually darken our material, but we would have to use the subtract. So we'll come in here, we'll do 0.8. And now I'm subtracting 0.8. I'm just still previewing this, so we got to preview this one. And you can see here I can actually remove color information. And what this is helpful for is as we get into other tutorials, we'll talk about how to use these grayscale maps to be able to control information about where things are happening. And again, this is just like a high level approach to some of the math nodes. The last math node we can talk about is the POW node. So I'm just going to type in POW for power. And this will just raise any value to a power. And so it times itself. So here, if I take this V gradient, type it into base, and go to base color, hit 1, and then I'm going to right click, start previewing node. You can see that this is the gradient we started with. And if I type in 2, I type in 3, 4, what we're doing is we're multiplying out, or powering, taking to the power of that. So this can help us control where the gradient is. As you can see the example when we were subtracting, our gradient was staying tight, and this is kind of changing that out. We can actually also do a decimal, which would be on the exponent here, and this will tighten up. So a lot of times you can use the power node to kind of tighten up masks or clamp data. So hopefully this gives you an overview of some of the math nodes that we're going to be using and how these can be useful for us in the future.